The Water Chapter. The heart of the martial art of the Two Heavens style takes water as its foundation and exercises the practice of advantage. Because of this, I have named this the Water Chapter, and here write about the swordsmanship of this style. This way is in all regards difficult to write about in detail with the mind just as it is. But even if the words do not seem to connect, you should be able to perceive its principles naturally. You should deeply consider what is written in this book, word by word, character by character. If you think about it indifferently, you are likely to diverge from the way many times. Concerning the principles of the martial arts, there may be many places where they are described in the manner of a contest of individuals, but it is essential that you understand these principles to be for a battle of opposing armies of 10,000 men as well, and that you see them in a large way. In this way especially, if you misperceive it or become lost just a little, you will fall into distortion. You will not reach the essence of the martial arts by merely looking at this book. Think that what is written down here was done just for you, and do not consider simply looking at it, familiarizing yourself with it, or trying to imitate it. Rather, you should consider these principles as though they were discovered from your own mind, and continually make great efforts to make them a physical part of yourself. The frame of mind for the martial arts. In the way of the martial arts, do not let your frame of mind be any different from your everyday mind. In both everyday and military events, your mind should not change in the least, but should be broad and straightforward, neither drawn too tight nor allowed to slacken even a little. Keep the mind in the exact center, not allowing it to become sidetracked. Let it sway peacefully, not allowing it to stop doing so for even a moment. You should investigate these things thoroughly. Do not let your mind stand still even when you are in repose, but do not let it speed up even when you are involved in quick actions. The mind should not be distracted by the body, nor the body distracted by the mind. Be very watchful of the mind, but less so of the body. Let the mind be replete without being the least bit overloaded. Though the mind appears weak on the surface, it should be strong at the bottom. Act so that your opponent cannot understand your mind. The man whose body is small should bear everything in mind about the man whose body is large, and the man whose body is large should bear everything in mind about the man whose body is small. But whether the body be large or small, keep the mind straight and in a way that it will allow no personal preferences. All these things are essential. Do not let the mind become clouded inside. Keep it broad and place your wisdom in that broad place. It is very important to polish both wisdom and mind earnestly. Sharpen your wisdom, distinguish principle and its opposite in the world. Learn the good and bad of all things, experience all the arts and accomplishments and their various ways, and act in a way so that you will not be taken in by anyone. This is the heart of the wisdom of the martial arts. There is something particularly unique in the wisdom of the martial arts. Even when the action is extraordinarily lively on the battlefield, you should take the principles of the martial arts to the extreme and keep your mind unmoved. You should investigate this thoroughly. Appearance in the martial arts. In body posture, your face is neither turned down nor turned up. It is neither turned to the side nor distorted. Your eyes are not confused, and your brow is not knit. Narrow the space between your eyebrows, and do not move your eyeballs at all. Narrow the eyes a little without expressing a glimmer. With your face tranquil and the line of your nose straight, you should have a slight sensation of sticking your chin out. The line of the back of your neck is straight. Put strength into the nape of your neck, and think of your body as one from the shoulders down. Drop both shoulders. Keep your back straight. Do not stick out your rear, and put strength from your knees to the front of your feet. Extend your stomach so that your hips will not be bent. To tighten the wedge, so to speak, the scabbard of your short sword should be carried at the belly and the sash tied so that it will not loosen. This is the teaching of tightening the wedge. In all things concerning the body in the martial arts, make the everyday body the body for the martial arts, and the body for the martial arts the everyday body. This is essential, and should be examined thoroughly. Using the eyes in martial arts. In using the eyes, do so in a large and encompassing way. There is observation, and there is seeing. The eye of observation is strong. The eye of seeing is weak. To see the far away as nearby, and the nearby as far away, is essential to the martial arts. To know your opponent's sword, yet not to see it at all, is very important in the martial arts. You should make great efforts in this. The use of the eyes is the same for martial events, whether in individual combat or in large confrontations. It is essential that your eyes do not move, and that you be able to see on both sides. It is difficult to understand such a thing when, suddenly, the situation becomes chaotic. Learn what is written in this book. Master the use of the eyes, and do not change that use under any circumstances. This is something you should investigate thoroughly. The way to hold a sword. To grasp a sword, give your thumb and index fingers a sense of flotation. Keep your middle finger neither tight nor loose, and tighten your ring and little fingers. It is wrong to have a relaxed grasp. You should take up the sword with the idea of cutting your opponent down. When you do this, you should hold your sword so that there is no change in your grasp, nor the possibility of your hand contracting into an uncontrollable position. Whether you are bracing, parrying, striking, or restraining your opponent's sword, you should be intent on moving only your thumb and index finger a little. In all events, grasp your sword with the intent of cutting the man down. Your grasp does not change when doing this, whether the act involves the testing of new swords on prisoners or corpses, or is taking place in a real fight. In all things, whether it be the sword or the hand, immobility is undesirable. Immobility means a dead hand. Mobility means a living hand. You should understand this well. Use of the feet. In the carriage of the feet, you should float your toenails a little and step strongly with your heels. In the use of the feet, you should walk as usual, whether the case calls for large, small, quick or slow strides. Feet that seem to fly, float, or be immobile are, all three, undesirable. There is something important in this way called the yin-yang foot, and it is considered essential. The yin-yang foot means never moving just one foot. With yin-yang, you step right and left, whether striking, pulling back, or parrying a blow. I repeat, you should never step with just one foot. You should investigate this thoroughly. The 5 stances. The 5 stances include the upper, the middle, the lower, the right side stance, and the left side stance. The stances are divided into 5, but they are all for the purpose of cutting a man down. There are no other than these 5. No matter which of these stances you take, you should not think of the stance itself, but rather that you are going to cut your opponent down. Whether a stance is large or small, it should follow the circumstances and the advantage you wish to take. The middle, upper, and lower are stances of the body. The 2 side stances are stances of free and easy motion. The left side and right side stances are those used to check the area above you and to the 2 sides. For their use you should judge according to the circumstances. You should understand that in this way it is largely said that the middle stance is the best. The main intention of the stance itself is found in the middle stance. Look at the martial arts in terms of large armies. The middle stance is the seat of the commanding general, and the 4 other stances follow after him. You should investigate this thoroughly. The way of the sword. Knowing the way of the sword means that even when you handle with 2 fingers what I generally indicate as the sword, you understand what you are doing and can handle it freely. You go against the way of the sword by trying to handle it with speed, and it will be difficult to wield. To the extent that you handle the sword well, you will handle it tranquilly. If you think you will handle it with speed as you would a fan or a dagger, you will not be in accord with the way of the sword, and it will be difficult to wield. Using what is called a knife cut, you will be unable to cut a man down with a sword. If you have struck downward with your sword, raise it in a simple way. If you have swung it to the side, return it to the other side in a simple way. But in all cases, extend your elbow fully and swing with strength. This is the way of the sword. If you learn to use the 5 fundamentals or stances of my martial art, the way of the sword will be in order, and you will handle it well. You should practice this thoroughly. Concerning the first of the 5 fundamentals, the middle stance, where the tip of the sword is aimed at your opponent's face, is the first of the 5 fundamentals. When you meet with your opponent and he strikes with his sword, deflect it to the right. When he strikes at you again, strike so that the tip of his sword returns upward and leave your sword, which is swung downward, in just that position. When your opponent attacks again, strike his hands from below. This is the first. All of these 5 fundamentals are difficult to understand just by what is written here. For the 5 fundamentals, you train in the way of the sword with your hands. With these 5 techniques of using the sword, you will know my way of the sword and will be able to understand your opponent's sword, no matter how he strikes. This is why I am teaching you that with 2 swords, there are no other than these 5 stances. You should put them into practice. Concerning the second fundamental, in the second use of the sword, take the upper stance and strike your opponent at the same moment he makes his attack to strike you. If you have struck at your opponent but missed him, leave your sword just as it is, and when he strikes again, strike him by bringing your sword back up. This will be the same for yet another strike. There are various frames of mind and rhythms to take within these fundamental stances. Practice this style within their framework, and you will know the 5 ways of the sword in detail. Thus, you will win in any situation. You should put them into practice. Concerning the third fundamental. In the third fundamental, use the lower stance with an idea of drawing your opponent in. When he advances to strike, you strike his hands from below. At the point when you are to strike his hand, your opponent may once again advance to strike. As he goes to knock down your sword, let his excessive rhythm pass, then cut his upper arm laterally after he has made his strike. With the lower stance, you kill the opponent at the same moment he strikes. For training in the way, the lower stance is fitting for both the beginner and the more experienced alike. You should take up the sword and practice. Concerning the fourth fundamental. In the fourth stance, you should take a position with the sword held laterally to the left, striking your opponent's sword hand from below. As your opponent moves to strike down on your upward strike, stay intent on striking his hand. Parry the path of his sword immediately, then cut obliquely in the direction of your shoulder. This is the way of the sword. Again, it is a means of winning by parrying the path of your opponent's sword as he strikes. You should investigate this thoroughly. Concerning the fifth fundamental. In the fifth fundamental, you should take a stance with your sword held laterally to your right. As your opponent comes to strike, change the path of your sword from the lower side, raise it to the upper position, and immediately cut down from above. This is also for the purpose of knowing the way of the sword well. If you get used to wielding the sword with this fundamental stance, you will be able to handle a heavy sword easily. I have not written in detail about these 5 fundamentals. To know my style in general, to gain a larger understanding of its rhythm, and to be able to discern the direction of your opponent's sword, it is essential to first polish these 5 fundamentals daily. By earnestly applying these paths of the sword, by seeing through your opponent's intent, and by using these various rhythms, even as you fight with your opponent, you will win in one way or another. You should understand this thoroughly. The lesson of the stance, no stance. The so-called stance-no stance calls for no stance at all to be taken with your sword. However, as I place this within the 5 stances, there is a stance here. According to the chances your opponent takes, and his position and energy, your sword will be of a mind to cut him down in fine fashion, no matter where you place it. According to the moment, if you want to lower your sword a little from the upper stance, it will become a middle stance. If, according to the situation, you raise your sword a bit from the middle stance, it will become the upper stance. Likewise, the lower stance may be raised a little to become the middle stance. This means that the 2 side stances, depending on their position, may be moved a little to the center to become either the middle or lower stance. This is the principle in which there is and there is not a stance. At its heart, this is first taking up the sword and then cutting down your opponent, no matter what is done or how it happens. Whether you parry, slap, strike, hold back, or touch your opponent's cutting sword, you must understand that all of these are opportunities to cut him down. To think, I'll parry, or I'll slap, or I'll hit, hold, or touch will be insufficient for cutting him down. It is essential to think that anything at all is an opportunity to cut him down. You should investigate this thoroughly. With martial arts in the larger field, the placement of numbers of people is also a stance. All of these are opportunities to win a battle. It is wrong to be inflexible. You should make great efforts in this. Striking your opponent in 1 count. The rhythm of striking an opponent in 1 count means taking a position within which both you and your opponent may strike each other, and, before he has settled on a tactic, and without moving your body or putting your mind anywhere, striking him quickly and directly. Striking with this rhythm before your opponent has even considered pulling back his sword, avoiding a blow, or striking with his sword is the 1 count. You should learn this well, practicing to strike quickly in the rhythm of the interval. The double action rhythm. In the double action rhythm, when you advance to strike your opponent and he quickly moves back and then strikes, feign your next move by first striking at the point where he has completed his action, then strike once again at the point of his withdrawal. This is the double action rhythm. It will be rather difficult to master this stroke by merely following what is written here, but once having received this lesson, you will quickly come to understand it. The no thought, no concept strike. When you think that both you and your opponent are ready to strike, your body becomes a striking body, your mind becomes a striking mind, and your hand instantaneously strikes with strength emerging from nothingness and leaving no wake. This is the most important strike, that of no thought, no concept. This is often an effective strike, and you should practice and master it thoroughly. The strike of running water. Should you and your opponent be equally matched, and should he attempt to quickly move away, avoid your strike, and brush your sword away, you must inflate both body and mind. Let your sword follow your body, and quite slowly strike with all the power of momentarily restrained water bursting forth from a running stream. This I call the strike of running water. When you master this, you will have with certainty a good strike. It is essential to discern your opponent's position. The connection hit. When you are about to strike your opponent and he tries to either parry or brush the stroke aside, hit his head, hand, and foot in one stroke. The connection strike describes a strike made any place at all with one path of your sword. Learn this strike well. It will be effective at any time. Use this in fights often, and you will understand it. The flint and spark hit. The flint and spark hit is executed by striking with great certainty and strength, without raising your sword at all, when your sword is joined with your opponent's. You should put strength into your feet, body, and hands, and strike quickly with these three. The autumn leaf strike. The heart of the autumn leaf strike is in striking down your opponent's sword and picking it up yourself. When your opponent takes a stance in front of you and is intent on striking, hitting, or parrying with his sword, strike his sword strongly with either the no thought, no concept strike or the flint and spark strike in mind. In the same moment, without letting up for a second, if you hit him again with the lowered point of your weapon, he will invariably drop his sword. The body taking the place of the sword. This could also be called the sword taking the place of the body. As a rule, when you strike at your opponent, you do not strike with both body and sword at the same time. Depending on the circumstances of your opponent's attack, you use your body first in the strike, causing your sword to then strike regardless of your body. Though it may be that without moving your body, you strike with your sword, for the most part, the body strikes first and is followed by the strike of the sword. You should investigate this thoroughly and put it into practice. The strike and the hit. The strike and the hit are two different things. The heart of what is called a strike, no matter what kind of strike, is to do so consciously and with certainty. A hit is when you have advanced toward and collided with your opponent, even when, by virtue of your strength, he dies immediately. This is a hit. A strike is executed consciously. You should examine this. Whether you are going for your opponent's hand or foot, the hit comes first. This is so that after the hit you can strike with strength. Hitting may be understood as touching. When you have learned this well, it is a special thing. You should make efforts in this. The body of the shuko. The essence of this technique is that the shuko does not extend his arms. When you advance toward your opponent, do not have the least thought of extending your arms, but rather rush in quickly before he strikes. If you think of extending your arms, your body will retract. Thus, be intent on entering quickly and striking with your entire body. It is easy to approach with your body in the same time it would take for your hand to reach out. You should investigate this thoroughly. The body of lacquer and glue. The essence of lacquer and glue is that when you have come close to the body of your opponent, stick to it without separating. When you have closed in on your opponent's body, stick to it with strength. Head, body, and feet. Often people will close in with their head or feet but will leave out the rest of their body. Keep your body pressed to your opponent's without letting even a small space in between. You should investigate this thoroughly. Comparing stature. Comparing stature refers to the avoidance of contracting your body in any way whenever you have closed in on an opponent. Close in with strength, extending your legs, waist, and neck, and align your face with that of your opponent. In measuring yourself up to him, be intent on exceeding him. You will then gain in height and rush in with strength. You should make great efforts with this. Applying glue. When you and your opponent strike together and he has checked your blow, continue to apply your sword to his as if you were applying glue, and close in. The essence of this stickiness is to make it difficult for your swords to separate, but you must be mindful not to use too much strength. When you make contact with your opponent's sword, apply the glue and close in. Do so with great tranquility, and you will feel no distress. The difference between being sticky and being entangled is that stickiness is strong and entanglement is weak. You should make a distinction between the two. The body blow. The body blow is executed by closing in on your opponent and hitting him with your body the split second before he takes action. Turn your face a little to the side, extend your left shoulder and hit your opponent's chest. The action of hitting him should be done with great bodily force, with breathing and rhythm, and while being mindful to close in with momentum. When you grasp this way of closing, you will become strong enough to throw a person back a great distance. You will be able to hit him with such strength that he dies. You should practice this well. 3 parries. When closing in on your opponent and parrying the sword with which he strikes, make as if to stab him in the eye with your own sword. Then draw his sword toward your right shoulder. This is the first parry. The next, the stabbing parry, involves parrying the sword your opponent strikes with by making as if to stab his right eye, then stabbing him with the intention of jamming your sword into his neck. Again, when your opponent strikes, close in on him with a short sword, and without much regard for the sword that you parry, close in as if to strike your opponent's face with your left hand. These are the 3 parries. Keep in mind the tightening of your left hand and making as if to strike your opponent's face with your fist. This is something you should practice thoroughly. Stabbing the face. When you have faced off with your opponent and your swords are equally set, it is essential that you be constantly intent on stabbing his face with the tip of your sword. If you keep your mind on stabbing your opponent's face, he will pull his face and body back. If you can make him do this, you will have various advantages for victory. You should make thorough efforts in this. In the midst of the fight, if you are intent on making your opponent flinch, you will have already obtained the victory. For this reason, you should not forget about stabbing at your opponent's face. Among the disciplines of the martial arts, this is a principle you should practice. Stabbing the heart. Stabbing the heart means that in the midst of a fight, when you are obstructed both above and at the side and are completely unable to slash your opponent, you should stab him. The instant you are aware of having evaded his striking sword, expose the ridge of your sword directly at your opponent, draw back so that the tip does not waver, and stab him in the chest. If you have become tired or your sword will not cut, this technique can be used exclusively. You should understand this thoroughly. Katsu Totsu. For Katsu Totsu, when making your attack and closing in on your opponent, and he in turn goes to make a counterattack, raise your sword as if to stab him from below and strike him in return. Both actions should be done with a quick rhythm, striking with a Katsu Totsu. That is, Katsu when you make your rising stab, Totsu when you strike. Whenever you are in the middle of an exchange of blows, this rhythm is particularly fitting. The proper execution of Katsu Totsu is to keep a sense of stabbing your opponent as you raise the tip of your sword, but then in that very instant to strike him. That is the rhythm. You should practice and investigate this well. Slap and parry. The slap and parry is used when you are engaged with an opponent and the rhythm becomes one of just banging away at cross purposes. When your opponent strikes, you slap and meet his sword with yours. The heart of slapping and meeting is not simply in a fierce slap or a simple parry. In responding to your opponent's sword, you slap it as it strikes, and then immediately you strike your opponent. The essence of this is that you take the offensive with both the slap and the strike. If your slap is done with a good rhythm, even with small intent, the tip of your sword will not fall no matter how hard your opponent strikes. Encountering many opponents. Encountering many opponents is of concern when you alone are engaged against a large number of men. Unsheathe both sword and short sword, open left and right arms broadly, and take a stance with your swords tilted laterally. Even when your opponents come at you from all directions, be of a mind to drive them into one place. When your opponents attack, see clearly who is in front of you and who behind. Quickly engage the man or men advancing in front of you, but watch peripherally and understand the position of your opponents. Handle the sword in your right hand and the sword in your left at one time, but independently. It is not good to hesitate. The essence of this is to quickly take stances toward your opponents on both sides. Where opponents come forth, cut into them vigorously and put them into disorder. Then immediately charge to where other opponents advance and rout them as well. Above all, be intent on driving your opponents into one direction like a school of fish. When you see that they are falling all over each other, you should wade into them vigorously and without any pause. If you do not chase in directly toward the place where your opponents have gathered, you will not make progress. And if you start thinking about the direction from which your opponents will come, Your mind will be waiting, and you will have the same result. Parry your opponent's rhythm, know where they will crumble, and you will have the victory. From time to time, practice herding your opponents into a group and chasing after them. If you understand the heart of that, you will be at ease whether your opponents number 1, 10, or even 20. Investigate this and practice it well. The principle of exchanging blows. The principle of exchanging blows refers to being able to understand victory in terms of the martial arts and the sword. It is not in writing it down in detail. Practicing well, you will know victory. By and large, it is the sword that manifests the way of the martial arts. This is an oral tradition. One strike. If you keep the one strike in mind, you will assuredly gain the victory. If you do not study the martial arts well, they will be difficult to understand. If you do train yourself thoroughly in this, the way will be there for the martial arts to develop in accordance with your mind, and for your mind to take the victory on its own. You should practice thoroughly. Direct transmission. The heart of direct transmission is handed down by receiving the true way of the two-sword style. It is essential that you train thoroughly and make it a part of you. This is an oral tradition. I have recorded in this chapter the main points of the swordsmanship of the two-sword style. In the martial arts, you take up the sword and learn how to overcome others. First, with the 5 fundamentals, you gain knowledge of the 5 stances. You learn the way of the sword. Your entire body becomes flexible. Your mind becomes quick. You become skillful on your own with the sword. Your body and feet work harmoniously with your mind, and you move as you please. Overcoming one person or two goes according to your knowledge of right and wrong in the martial arts. Practice what is in this book, line by line. Engage your opponents, and gradually you will grasp the principle of the way. Keep this unceasingly in mind, but do not be hurried. Try your hand from time to time, and learn the heart of each step. And no matter whom you fight, know his mind. The journey of 1,000 ri proceeds step by step, so think without rushing. Understanding that this is the duty of a warrior, put these practices into action. Surpass today what you were yesterday. Go beyond those of poor skill tomorrow, and exceed those who are skillful later. You should do as is written in this book, and not think in a way that will let your mind become sidetracked. Therefore, no matter what kind of opponent you fight and defeat, by turning your back on this teaching, you will not be on the true way. If these principles are recalled to mind, you should be able to discern how to beat any number of opponents on your own. This being so, grasp the way of the martial arts with the strength of your knowledge of swordsmanship, for many opponents or only one. See to it that you temper yourself with 1,000 days of practice, and refine yourself with 10,000 days of training. You should investigate this thoroughly. 12th day of the 5th month, 2nd year of Shōhō, Shinmen Musashi.